What's up guys, it's Brad from Light Architect. In this video, I'm going to show how you can create a wave and foam system using dynamic paint in order to integrate CG boats or other watercrafts into your live action shots. This effect is fairly straightforward and is fairly useful for helping integrate those distant elements that need a little bit of live action interaction. So this is a composite that I have created here using this technique, and we're not going to be going through this entire process, but rather the addition of the foam itself. So as you can see here, these set of nodes right here are where we overlay our foam onto the live action shot using this alpha over node. So you can see if I turn the factor off, this is what we get without that foam helping to integrate the CG into the shot. And then, of course, once we add it in, we get a much better integrated CG ship element with the foam, especially in the back here as the ship is moving along this path. So I'll just go ahead and show you guys the output of what we will create. So using this viewer node, we're just going to create this foam system that's a procedural system using dynamic paint that helps to integrate everything together. And if you guys like, I will do a little compositing breakdown of this entire composite as well. So leave a comment in the comment section below and I will gladly do a compositing walkthrough of this node setup here that got this final result. So anyways guys, without further ado, let's get started. In order to composite all these elements together, I have 3 different view layers here, and I'm going to start on our foam waves view layer, and this is going to be the area where we're going to create those waves and help integrate them into our shot. So to start, I'll go ahead and delete our foam waves here, and I'm also going to delete this proxy boat so we can start together. And now we just have 2 objects. So this will be our starting point. We have one collection with just our CG boat here, which I've gotten off of Sketchfab, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And then we have another collection here with our ground layer, which is just a plane in our scene. As you can see here, if we go to rendered view, we've made our boat a holdout, but this is just the general setup here that we're going to start off with. So for this tutorial, we're just going to be utilizing this one view layer. Our background view layer is our shadow catcher, and our foreground view layer is rendering out the CG boat by itself. But again, we're just going to be creating the foam waves on this view layer right here. So right now we just have 2 elements in our scene. We have our ground geometry here, which is just kind of telling us, how the live action shot is laid out and where our CG ship is actually going to be cut off by the water. So this is just a nice reference we have. So to start off, the first thing we're going to do is duplicate this ground system and create that wave simulation on it. And then finally, we're going to add that foam on top of that wave system. Again, both of these times using dynamic paint. So I'll go ahead and select our ground here, or you can just add your own plane, but I'll go ahead and just select our ground here. I'll press Shift D to duplicate our ground. Then I'll select it here and we'll call this wave/foam plane, okay? And now I'll go ahead and grab this, I'll press M and I'll add it to a new collection and we'll call this waves/foam, okay? And now we actually don't want to see this background view layer at all. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And now we just have this plane here that we're going to use to simulate our waves and foam. And I'll go ahead and get rid of this material on this one, and we'll make one from scratch for our foam system. Now before we start simulating any waves with dynamic paint, we do want to make sure our plane is subdivided. So as you can see here, if we go into edit mode, we only have 4 vertices on this plane right now. So we need to make sure that in order to simulate those waves effectively, that we have plenty of geometry to work with. So I'll go ahead and select all 4 points here. Then I'll go to Edge, Subdivide, crank this up. And once again, I'll go to Edge, Subdivide once more, crank it up again. And I'll do it one more time, just so we have plenty of detail here. You can also use a subdivision surface modifier if you'd like. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, if you're concerned with poly count, you can, of course, scale down this plane and still have a fair bit of detail, but this is looking pretty good. So now we'll go back into object mode. And now let's go ahead and make this wave/foam plane a canvas for our wave simulation. So I'll just go to our physics properties tab here and click on the dynamic paint option. And now we'll make this type canvas, click on add canvas. And now this is a canvas for painting. However, we actually want the surface type to be waves. And now that we have a canvas for our simulation, we actually need to make this ship a brush that interacts with it. However, in this case, since we have a fair bit of detail on our ship mesh, what I'm actually going to do is create a proxy version of our ship in order to save some simulation time. In order to do this, I'll go ahead and press Shift A, and I'll just add a basic icosphere to our scene. And I'll just grab it here and put it right where our ship is, scale it up a bit like so, and I'll scale it all the way around our ship here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a shrink wrap modifier to our icosphere here so that it will kind of wrap around our ship and create a proxy version of our ship that we can use for our simulation. So I'll go ahead and go to our modifiers tab here, and we'll go to add modifier and then click on shrink wrap. Now that we have shrink wrap selected, we can select our target to be our boat. And now, as you can see here, we have a somewhat proxy version of our boat that we can now use as a brush for our wave and foam simulation. And now that we have used that shrink wrap modifier, we can label our icosphere, and we'll call this boat proxy. And also I want to parent our boat proxy to our boat itself, because we do want to animate our boat itself. So I'll just select our boat proxy and then press Shift and select our boat, and then I'll press Control P and we'll parent it to object. And now we'll go ahead and animate our boat here. Select our boat here, and I'll turn off our viewport display for our boat proxy. And now we'll just animate our boat over the course of our timeline, and our boat proxy should move along with it. At frame 0, I'll bring our boat back here. I'll press I, add a keyframe, location, rotation, scale. Then I'll go to frame 100, grab our boat, track it over, press I, location, rotation, scale, and I'll go to graph editor, and I'll go to channel, extrapolation mode, linear extrapolation. And now our boat should just move over the course of our timeline, as well as our boat proxy, as you can see right here. So now we're going to use our boat proxy mesh as our brush for our dynamic paint waves and foam simulation. So first I'll select our boat proxy, I'll press M, add this to a new collection, we'll call it boat proxy. And that's so we can select this as our dynamic paint brush collection. And we'll go to our physics properties tab here. I'll add this boat proxy as a dynamic paint type brush, and we'll click on add brush here. And most of these default settings should work just fine. You can adjust the wave type if you really want to, but I found that depth change works pretty well. And you can also play around with some of these settings as well to get different results, but this is looking pretty good. Now I'll select our wave foam plane here. I'll switch the brush collection to boat proxy. And now, as you can see here, if we kind of turn off our boat here for a second, we can zoom in. You'll see that our boat proxy mesh is actually making some waves on our plane here. So now let's go ahead and adjust a few of these settings on our plane. First thing I'll do is check the open borders checkbox. That's so that our waves don't bounce back at our mesh, so that'll give a much more stable simulation. And then I'm also going to decrease the timescale setting here. As you can see, our waves are moving so quick right now. We actually want our wave simulation to seem larger in scale. So to do that, I'll just bring our timescale down to something like 0.1. And now as you can see here, it's going to look much more like a large scale simulation. And that's looking pretty good. You can see kind of the ship's wake here in the back. You can bring your timescale down more as well if you want, maybe something like 0.05. You can bring it all the way down to 0.01 actually, just to get, for the sake of this example, show you guys what it does. Actually create some pretty interesting looking waves that are fairly large scale. This is probably a little bit too much for our ship, but I think maybe 0.05 should be pretty good here. You can see we're getting some nice shape on the edge of our ship. If we go ahead and turn off our boat proxy in the viewport and then turn on our boat, you can see what's going on here. It's creating a nice little simulation for our boat, and I think this is going to look really good and actually help break up our ship in a more organic way to help integrate it into the shot a bit better. So nice little simulation here with our foam and plane selected. I'll go to cache, and we'll label this cache as waves, okay? And do want to make sure your frame start and frame end are the areas of the timeline that you want to simulate this for. And now that we have kind of a basic wave simulation set up here, we'll create our foam simulation next. So for the foam simulation, it's also pretty simple. All we have to do here is select our wave foam plane. We can click on the plus button right here, and that's going to create a new canvas system. And we'll relabel this one just so we can label everything properly and have good organization here. We'll call this one foam, and then we'll call this one above us, call this waves. And for this one, we're going to choose the surface type of paint. And we're going to scroll down here. We want to make a new cache for this because it's a new system. So we want to actually call this one foam. And that's very important because you can't use both at the same time without labeling the caches separately. And then we want to select the brush collection for this foam system to be our boat proxy as well. And then finally, we'll scroll down here to the very bottom to our output layers. We want to use the wet map layer. Now, as you can see here, if we play through our scene, you'll notice that we're actually generating a kind of system here based on where our ship has been. Now, We can adjust a few settings here. One thing we might want to do is select the spread option. That's going to help spread the foam out over time based on where our ship has been. Now, if you're not seeing this, you might need to switch over your viewport shading option and switch this to attribute, because if you just have it like this, you might not see it. You want to make sure you can actually see that attribute in your viewport. Now, one thing we want to change in this specific example is our spread option. So go ahead and select the spread checkbox there. Now, as you can see here, when you play through your scene, that where that foam is going to spread out like so. Now, this is obviously a little bit too much. So what we might do is just bring down the speed of the spread to say something like maybe 0.25, about a fourth of the speed. And let's take a look at what that gives us. And now you can see we're looking a little bit better. And it's just going to kind of spread out our foam in a very procedural way. Now you can play around with some more of these settings, play around with the dry time, the dissolve time, but this is the general idea. Where the white is going to be your foam, where the black is going to be transparent, so that you can composite this over your footage. So this is the general concept here, guys. I'm gonna go with this for the sake of this tutorial as our weight painting system. Obviously, feel free to play around with your wave simulation as well as your foam simulation settings. So this is looking pretty good. Now we'll go ahead and bake our simulation and we'll get into creating the materials for this plane here. So I'll scroll down here and we'll click on Bake All Dynamics, and we'll give Blender a few seconds to calculate this system so you don't have to play it from the beginning every time. All right, so now that we have baked our two dynamic paint simulations here, our waves are looking pretty cool, and we can see it at any portion of our timeline without playing back from the beginning. So this is going to drive our foam system. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make the material for our foam system. So I'll go into our shading tab with our wave foam plane selected, and we'll add a new material and we'll call it foam. And the first thing we're going to do is add in our color attribute data, which is the data that our dynamic paint system has generated for our foam. So you can see here, if I zoom in, I can select our wet map, which is the white areas of our dynamic paint system here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use that data to tell Blender to create foam in some areas, but not create foam in other areas. And to do that, we'll use a mix shader. Go ahead and press Shift A, add a shader, mix shader right here. And we're going to take our color output of our wet map attribute into the factor input of our mix shader. And then we're going to press Shift A again, and we'll add a transparent shader here as the bottom portion of this mix shader. Actually, we do need to switch these because we want white to be where our principled BSDF shader is showing up, which we'll play around with here in a second. But now, as you can see here, if I go into rendered view, we have something like this, where our principled BSDF shader with a base color of white is showing up where that dynamic paint is, and everything else is transparent, which is what we want so far. So now what we want to do is break up our white area here to make it look more like foam. So to do that, we're actually going to just use a collection of noise textures that are going to go into the base color of our principled BSDF shader. So I'll go ahead over here, I'll press Shift A, we'll add a texture, noise texture, and we'll just connect the factor output of this noise texture into the base color input of our principled BSDF shader. I'm going to increase the scale a bit till we kind of create an interesting pattern on our foam here. I might try something like 80, and you can see it's just kind of breaking up our white pattern a bit, which is quite nice. I'm gonna maybe increase the detail to 15, so it's a little bit more detailed. And now we're actually going to add some more noise textures to add a bit of small and large scale detail to our foam system here. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A, we'll add a color, mix color node, and we're gonna change this one to subtract. And then we'll go here, we'll grab this noise texture, press Shift D to duplicate, and we'll take the factor output of this noise texture into the input of our subtract node. And then we're going to just kind of play around with this to subtract some areas of our foam. So bring it way down. We want a mixture of small and large scale detail here. You can also add some distortion to kind of mix it up a little bit. You can see it's already looking a bit more like foam with this noise. Again, this kind of depends on your personal taste. So we'll kind of just keep doing this for a bit until we have a decent looking foam system. So I'll duplicate our mix node here, and I'll also duplicate our noise texture, take this factor output into the subtract input here. And once again, we'll play around with our scale and all of our different settings here. So maybe I'll try something in between the other two, maybe 24, maybe bring down the distortion on this one so it's not as distorted. That's looking a little bit nicer. So this is the general concept here, guys. You can obviously make this more complex if you like. You can add as many noise textures as you like and get some really detailed results. But I think for the sake of this tutorial, this is gonna look pretty good as a foam system. Now, one thing we want to do is we wanna make sure that this foam system only shows up on one side of our boat here. So we don't want to see it through the bottom of our plane here. So to deal with that, we'll actually go here to the end of our shader node setup here, and I will add another mix shader. So I'll go ahead and press Shift D on this one, duplicate that. Then I'll add another transparent shader, put this one in the bottom input of the mix shader, and then I'm going to press Shift A and I'll search for a geometry node, and I'll grab the back facing output into the factor input. And now as you can see here, we get rid of those back faces, but we still see it when we view it through the main normal here. So that's just one way you can get rid of those other sides in case that's creating a compositing issue, which it was for me in this scenario. So now we have a nice little foam system here that we can composite on top of our footage. Go ahead and finish off this tutorial with a little compositing and setting up our view layers a little bit better. As I mentioned, we have 3 different view layers. We have our foreground, which will only contain our CG ship. We have our background, which will contain a shadow catcher of our CG ship onto the water. And then finally, we have our waves collection right here. So for this foam waves collection, we only want to render out the waves themselves, but no boat. So I'll go ahead and make this boat collection a holdout only. Now you can see it's actually not being rendered, but is actually hiding the foams wherever the boat is overlaid on top of them, which is exactly what we want. We also want to make sure to not render our boat proxy. So go ahead and deselect that. And now everything else is looking pretty good here. Now we'll go to our background view layer. Now, one thing we want to do is actually use our wave foam plane as our background shadow catcher instead of the ground that we have originally created here. So I'll go ahead and delete this ground, and I'll press Shift D, duplicate this wave foam plane, and then I'll grab this and drag it into our background layer here, and I'll select our second wave foam plane. We'll actually call this wave foam ocean shadow. And now what we want to do, we'll go ahead and turn off our boat proxy on this view layer. And since we only want shadows on this view layer, we'll turn off our other collection containing our waves and foam. So go ahead and turn that off. And now on this ocean shadow plane that we have duplicated here, we actually have our same dynamic paint settings for our waves and foam simulation, but we actually just want to bake that out as well. Since we've duplicated it, it doesn't actually have the baked simulation, but rather just the properties. So I'll go ahead and click on Bake All Dynamics really quick, so it'll do that for us. But we do want to change one thing about this plane. Even though it has the same waves as our waves and foam plane, we actually want to make the material so that it accepts shadows only. And because we have the foam material on it right now, it won't actually accept those shadows very well. So we'll go ahead and go to our material properties tab, and I'll actually remove the foam layer from it. And now I'll just add a new material. We'll make the base color actually something, closer to the water in our scene. So now it's actually going to have more realistic shadows on it. Then also we can go here to our object properties tab and select the shadow catcher option. And now as you can see here, we're actually accepting the shadows on this view layer, which is on this object that resembles the waves that we have created. So that's looking pretty good. We have our ocean shadow. Our boat is labeled as indirect only, which is exactly what we want for our background shadow catcher view layer. Go ahead and go to our foreground view layer here. And for this one, I'll turn off our boat proxy as well. We only want our boat to show up on this view layer. So we'll go ahead and make this guy a holdout, and our waves and foam will be turned off for now since we have that same system on our background shadow catcher, which we're using as a holdout on this view layer. So if you don't understand view layers very well, I do have a tutorial on how you can use them more effectively. This tutorial is really more about creating that dynamic paint foam system itself. So yeah, if I go here forward, you can see that we're getting a nice holdout with our waves on our CG boat here, which is exactly what we want for this view layer. The main one we're looking at for this tutorial is our foam's wave collection, which is this guy right here, and it's looking pretty good. So that's how you can create some waves here. I'll go ahead and render out our image, and I'll go through a quick version of the composite just in case you guys are interested a little bit about that. I may make a little bit longer video on that in the future as well. Alright guys, so this is our composite with the foam here. And as you can see here, this system is breaking up our ship in a way that makes a little bit sense for it moving through the water. So just a nice way to integrate everything into the scene. As you can see here, this is our foam view layer that's overlaid on top of our composite. And you can see if we turn this off, as I showed at the beginning of the video, we lose that foam and we just get the waves by themselves. However, once we add that in, helps integrate our ship into the shot a little bit better. Now, there are some ways that can make this even better. However, for those distant elements or even an overhead shot of a ship moving through the water, I think it's a pretty nice way to help sell an effect a little bit better. It's looking pretty nice here before and after. One of the biggest things that helps sell this for me is just the variation in the waves that kind of hold out the boat and help integrate it into the shot a bit better. So just a quick little tutorial for you guys on how you can add a wave and foam system to your boat feel free to play around with this technique and put your own twists on it, add some different noise patterns to the foam, make it last a little bit longer, spread it out a bit more, but this is the general concept. I hope this video was helpful. As always, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. Let us know what you'd like to learn next on the channel, and I'll see you next time.